Good evening. My name is Noah Tolley. I direct the Center for Urban Engagement here at Wheaton College. The center's mission is to promote just, sustainable, and flourishing urban communities through the academic study of cities and transformational experiences of urban life. Q, as we call the center, has 6 program areas: the Urban Studies major, the Urban Studies minor, the Wheaton in Chicago program, which is our semester-long experiential residential program in the city, the Equitas program in urban leadership, colloquia and reading groups for our 18 supporting faculty from every academic division of the college, and public lectures like the one you're attending tonight. And it's my pleasure tonight to welcome you to this Q lecture, $2 a day, which is the first one sponsored by the Equitas program and is also co-sponsored by the Christ at the Core program. How many of you here are currently enrolled in the first-year seminar course? Raise your hands. Great. If you're enrolled in the first-year seminar, you are probably currently or nearly currently unpacking the question, what is the good life? And one of the sub-questions about what is the good life is, does the good life depend on what kind of person I am? There are a number of ways one might look at that question, but when we do, we most commonly consider whether we can have the good life if we are, say, materially wealthy and yet unvirtuous. That is, we ask the question, does the good life depend on my being temperate or courageous or hopeful? But there's another, less often considered dimension of this question. Can you have the good life if you're a poor person? Or what does it mean and take to make the good life accessible to the destitute? Tonight's speaker is uniquely positioned to speak to these questions and to the mission of the Center for Urban Engagement. Dr. Kathy Edin is professor of sociology and public affairs at the Woodrow Wilson School of Princeton University. She is also co-director of the Bendheim-Thoman Center for Research on Child Well-Being. Dr. Edin is one of the nation's leading poverty researchers, working in the domains of welfare and low-wage work, family life, and neighborhood contexts through direct, in-depth observations of the lives of low-income populations. A qualitative and mixed method researcher, she has taken on key mysteries about the urban poor that have not been fully answered by quantitative work. How do single mothers possibly survive on welfare? Why don't more go to work? Where do they end up as single mothers, or why do they end up as single mothers in the first place? Where are the fathers and why do they disengage from their children's lives? How have the lives of the single mothers changed as a result of welfare reform? The hallmark of her research is her direct, in-depth observations of the lives of low-income women, men, and children. Edin has authored 8 books and some 60 journal articles, including $2 a Day, The Art of Living on Virtually Nothing in America, co-authored with Luke Schaefer. Some of you are reading parts of that book for your first-year seminar. Edin received a bachelor's degree in sociology from North Park University and a PhD in sociology from Northwestern University. She has previously taught at Rutgers University, Northwestern University, the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, and Johns Hopkins University. In addition to $2 a Day, she is the co-author of Coming of Age in the Other America, It's Not Like I'm Poor, How Single Mothers Make Ends Meet in a Post-Welfare World, Doing the Best I Can, Fatherhood in the Inner City, and Promises I Can Keep, How Low-Income Women Put Motherhood Before Marriage. It'll be a real pleasure to hear from Dr. Edin tonight, and I ask you to join me in welcoming her here to Wheaton College.
Nicely done. So I hope somebody during Q&A will ask me about my own faith journey, my journey through the city of Chicago and what that has all meant. But I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start in, I'm echoing a little. Am I okay? Okay. I'm going to start in Baltimore. So I had, it was 2010. And in 2010, I was teaching at Harvard University But I went to Baltimore that summer to follow up on a very long-term study I'd been conducting among children who had been born in high-rise public housing in 1990. These children were now entering adulthood, and we wanted to go back and see how they were doing. So what this study did is it brought me into close contact with a lot of very poor Baltimore residents. I'll never forget the day that we went to Ashley's apartment. She lives in the Latrobe Homes along Madison Avenue in Baltimore, really in the shadow of the Dickensian Baltimore prison. I've been doing this kind of research, this in-depth, up-close research for about 30 years. When I showed up at Ashley's door, maybe 25, I'm not that old. And you know, when you're an old hand, you know when something's wrong. So we hadn't talked to Ashley for a number of years. We knew she was 19. We knew she had just had a baby about 2 weeks prior. But when she opened the door, the first thing I noticed is that she was not making eye contact. She was visibly unkempt. And you know, that thing that all parents learn to do with newborns, right? As you pass the newborn back and forth from one shoulder to another when you're trying to soothe the child. The crucial thing parents of newborns learn to do is this, right? Support the baby's head. And Ashley was not doing this. So the baby was screaming. We followed her up the stairs. You know, her apartment was on the second floor. And when I got up there, I noticed there was no furniture in the house, just a table with one broken leg, so sitting uselessly pushed against the corner, and one chair. So I sat on the floor, and Ashley sat on the chair with the baby. And it just so happened that it gave me the perfect view of the kitchen. Now, in this particular unit, all of the doors had been come loose and had fallen off the kitchen cupboard. So I could see exactly what was in the kitchen, and there was nothing in there, not even any baby formula. So this got me to wondering. Now, the study that I was supposed to be doing was a study of how poor people make the transition to adulthood. We know a lot about how the middle class, young people like you, make the transition to adulthood. Answer, slowly. We really don't know anything about the lives of less advantaged people and how they make that transition. So this is what I was supposed to be studying. But early in my career, my very first project really formed and honed here in Chicago was a study of how low-income welfare mothers made ends meet. And in fact, I spent my entire 20s traveling the country, talking to low-income single mothers, asking them about how they made ends meet. And that culminated in my first book, Making Ends Meet. So if you spend your entire 20s doing one thing, asking people about their budgets, you know, you sort of have a tick. Like if we went out to dinner tonight with a group of faculty, and I wanted to say, you know, to my host, so how do professors at Wheaton make ends meet? But you know, I restrained myself. But I didn't restrain myself with Ashley. And you know, I was trying to understand why there was nothing in this house, and I was stunned to learn. Now remember, I'd spent my 20s studying welfare mothers prior to welfare reform, right? And then I'd gone on and done other things. I'd studied the family, I'd studied the earned income tax credit, I'd studied fathers and so on. But I hadn't really sort of gotten up to date on what was happening, you know, with welfare. And so I was stunned to realize there was no income coming into this house at all, not from welfare, not from work, not from disability. Yes, the family had a housing subsidy. At that point, no one was getting food stamps, although that would soon change. But this family was living a cashless life, something that would be virtually impossible just 20 years prior to welfare reform. So, you know, one thing I would say to those of you in the first year seminar is, I was your age when I started doing this kind of research. And you never know when you're going to have an epiphany. So my first epiphany was, you know, could it be that in the aftermath of welfare reform, a kind of poverty, a poverty so deep, had emerged in the United States, a virtual cashless existence, and a poverty so deep that we hadn't even thought to look for it. So my second insight came the next day. So I was worried about Ashley and the baby. I said, you know, Ashley, if I come back, I can ask you some more questions. We give people $50 at the end of our interviews. I said, you know, I could give you another $50. She said, yeah, come back tomorrow. So I gave her the $50 and left. Now, the next day, you can imagine my surprise when Ashley literally met us at the door before we knocked. So she had gone to the drugstore and gotten a home perm, right? She looked terrific. She'd walked down to the Goodwill on Broadway Avenue and bought a pantsuit. She was wearing that pantsuit, and I kid you not, she met my gaze and with a spring in her step announced that mom was babysitting and she was on her way out to look for a job. Now I'm a skeptic. $50? You know, I thought to myself, could it be that there's something essential about cash in the world's most advanced capitalist society that is simply crucial? You know, we don't have a barter system like they have in much of the developing world. Could it be that that $50 was the difference between the Ashley I met the first day, who was really barely functioning, to the young woman I met the second day, who had the efficacy to go out and look for a job? So I put these two epiphanies, I don't think I knew they were epiphanies then, into my back pocket. And I went back to work, studying the transition to adulthood. And it wasn't until the fall when I returned to Harvard that Luke Shaver arrived in my office. He had come from the University of Michigan as a visiting researcher. And I was struggling to remember who he was and why he was there, you know, because I meet a lot of people. And I had agreed to sponsor him, but I'd forgotten he was coming. So, you know, and to cover my embarrassment, I was thinking, what do I know about this guy? And then it occurred to me that Luke just so happened to be the nation's expert on the one data set that could tell us definitively, it's a census data set, whether what I'd experienced with Ashley was a blip, an N of 1, or a trend. So he got very excited about the story of Ashley. He went off and he did what number geeks do. And I think we were both nonetheless stunned. I mean, I'm like, oh, come on, there can't be that many Ashleys, right? I was nonetheless stunned by this chart, which he brought to my office about a week later. Now, you know, don't look at the squiggly lines. This is, you know, what number geeks do, because they want to be as close to the data as possible. But what this chart shows is that prior to welfare reform, there are only about 600,000 families in the United States who had minor children who were living on less than $2 per person per day. We had to choose some threshold, so we borrowed a threshold from the World Bank. For various statistical reasons, it's not good to choose 0. Okay, so 600,000. By 2013, that number had increased to about 1.5 million households with about 3.2 million children. That is 1 in 4 poor children in the United States. So if you know anything about surveys, you know that you should be cautious and skeptical. So this is a little social science 101. You never want to draw a strong conclusion from a single data source. So we decided we were going to try to replicate this trend with every data source that exists on the population. And we have literally done that. This is the current population survey. And the red bars are the American Community Survey. That didn't start till 2000. That's what replaced the long form in the census. You guys don't even remember the long form. But it gives us up-to-date information on the population every year. And what we see is an amazing correspondence between these data sources, not only with each other, but with what Luke found in the SIP, the Survey of Income Program Participation. Another dirty little secret about surveys is that increasingly over time, people don't like taking them. This is called, so we have a lack of survey response increasing over time. So when you make a time trend, you've got to be careful of this. So the best thing to do is to turn to administrative data. And the best administrative data we have on the poor is from the food stamp program. If you lie to food stamps about your income, you can be thrown in jail and sentenced for longer than if you molested a child. And it says it's a felony right on the application. So people are really scared to lie to the food stamp program. So we went to their data and we asked an even sort of stronger question, a stronger test of our hypothesis. How many people at time of application or reapplication report zero income? And this is just households with kids. So what you see in those blue boxes is our original estimates from the Survey of Income and Program Participation. And the red line is the data from the food stamp program. Now, what do you notice about this chart? I teach people your age. You have to raise your hand and say something. Yes?
The SNAP data estimates are even higher than
The SNAP data estimates are even higher in 2011. Now, why might that be? This is going to be a theme, at least a sub-theme of this talk. Why might that be? So what do we know about household surveys? I just gave you the answer. They're done with households. So who might household surveys miss? Homeless people, okay? So one plausible explanation for the divergence is one sort of fallout of the growing $2 a day poverty is increasing family homelessness. So we're going to look to see whether that's true. This is what's happening in your nation's food pantries. Again, another administrative source of data showing dramatic rises in demand in our nation's food pantries since welfare reform went into effect. But ultimately, these numbers, while compelling, leave us with more questions than answers, right? Like, how do people end up in this situation? How do they survive? Like, how can you live a cashless life? And what are the implications for children? So Luke and I decided to issue ourselves a challenge. We were going to go back and find people like Ashley. We're going to pick 4 places where we didn't live. And we were going to show up and try to find people living on less than $2 per person per day and reported cash income, hang out with them, learn about their lives, and begin to create a baseline of information about these families. So of course, we began in America's greatest city, Chicago. We then decided, Chicago is kind of your quintessential American city, right? We then wanted to find, so your average city, although no city is really average. We then wanted to find a city that had been a boom town during the war on poverty, but it's since hit the skids, so we chose Cleveland, Ohio. In the 1950s, its boosters called it the greatest location in the nation. Anyone from Cleveland? Now they say other things about Cleveland, but I love Cleveland. Mistake by the lake is not true. We then wanted to find a place that had been really deeply poor during the war on poverty, but had seen a rebound. So you might have seen those iconic pictures of Bobby Kennedy and LBJ visiting Appalachia. And indeed, most of Appalachia is deeply poor, but one region has rebounded somewhat and is now at the nation's average, Johnson City, Tennessee. So we went to Johnson City. And then finally, we wanted to find a place that had been deeply poor, perhaps the most deeply poor place in America for generations. So we had the harrowing experience of beginning to do work in the Mississippi Delta. And from the 18 families we met there and followed for many, many months and years, we began to craft hypotheses about what could be the cause of $2 a day poverty. So from this extensive ethnographic work, we derived 3 hypotheses. The first is provocatively labeled welfare is dead. Now I'm going to try to convince you that welfare is dead using numbers. But the reason we entitled our chapter Welfare is Dead is not actually because of the numbers. It's because when trouble hit, it didn't even, catch this, occur to most of our families to knock on welfare's door. It had died in the imaginations of the poor. So let's begin with the numbers. In 1984, about 10 million children were served by welfare. That's about 5 million adults. Roughly 2/3 of all poor families with children were touched by the welfare system. Now, you might think this is too high. You might think this is too low. You're entitled to all of those opinions. So I'm not advocating for welfare here. But we saw a fairly robust welfare system, down somewhat from the late 1980s, but still a relatively robust system touching the lives of a lot of families. So what about today? So these are the most generous, liberal numbers. I could tell a much more dire story than this. But now we have only about 2.5 million children, about 900,000 adults across the entire nation receiving welfare. Half of those adults are in just 2 states, New York and California. That means across the rest of the nation, and these are HHS numbers, across the rest of the nation, there are only about 500,000 welfare recipients. And half of those are on state-only programs where they may only be getting as little as $20 a month from the state. Okay? Best estimate, there are only about 600,000 adults on what we usually think of as the welfare system, about 300,000 outside of California in New York. So of all poor families in the United States now, only about 23% are touched by our nation's welfare system, and that number is falling every year as states continue to contract their welfare rolls. So here is that same story of sharp decline in the cash safety net, because welfare is our main cash safety net program. This is how it plays out across the nation. Right? You can see Illinois is sort of right average, right in the middle here. You have the southern and western states, a much more conservative story, and then you have a few outliers. But even among these outliers, including my home state of Minnesota, the welfare system is still a shadow, all right, a shadow of what it once was. So Vermont, Oregon, and California are the other outlier states. Now, you might be saying, so what? So what? This is a good thing. This is just one piece of evidence that it may not be such a good thing. I wish you could see this better, but what this shows by state is the proportion of families with children who are showing up at SNAP offices saying they have 0 income, okay? No cash income. Now, in a state like Vermont that still has a robust welfare system, it is the most robust in the nation, only about 1% of families are showing up that way. In Illinois, the figure is 12%, I believe. And in much of the Deep South, it is as much as 17 or 18%, okay, of SNAP families coming to the doors of the SNAP office, saying they have absolutely no cash income. So as I said, the numbers only tell part of the story, and that wasn't what was most striking to us. I spent several years trailing Madonna Harris and her daughter Brianna as they moved across a series of homeless shelters on the near west side of Chicago. And we were sitting around one Saturday afternoon. There was no food in their little apartment in this homeless shelter, and the shelter didn't provide food on the weekends. So Brianna and Madonna were really hungry. And, maybe out of frustration, I find, you're not supposed to sort of cook the books with your respondents, but I finally, out of frustration, I said, Madonna, why don't you guys just go down and apply for welfare? And she looked at me, stunned at my stupidity, and said, girl, haven't you heard? They don't give that out anymore. Similarly, we were sitting with Travis and Jessica Compton in their apartment in Johnson City, Tennessee. We were all sitting at the bed in the front room. The back room is where the girls slept. And then Travis was standing in the kitchen window. And as we were talking, he was actually looking for the sheriff's deputy to arrive because they had gotten an eviction notice. They had lost their jobs in that seasonal economy. They both worked in the service sector right around Thanksgiving time when the tourist trade slowed. And it was now February. And they hadn't been able to pay the rent for 3 months. So they were on the verge of getting evicted. And it was Luke that finally said, Travis, you should just go down and apply for welfare. And Travis was stunned, and he said, what's that? He had never even heard of the program. Now, Reba Cormac in Cleveland had heard about the TANF program. But she was too proud. You hear this over and over again, but she was too proud to apply. Her father, who died when she was 12, was always a hard worker, and she thought she would disappoint him if she applied for welfare. But things got more and more desperate. Her little daughter, Zara, was really lacking the basic necessities. And so finally, she decided to go down, and we were sort of waiting around the house for her to come back to hear the story of what had happened. And she came in, and she said that the caseworker had told her, honey, I'm so sorry. There's just not enough money to go around. Why don't you come back next year? Now, by our research, the state of Ohio was sitting on $1 million TANF surplus that year, an unspent $1 million TANF surplus. I've had conversations with the welfare commissioner in Cuyahoga County. Their rolls dropped precipitously right before Ray McCormick applied for the first time, from somewhere around 27,000 to just 1,500. And believe me, that is not because there's less poverty in Cleveland than there used to be. So Ray got kind of caught up in the purge, and she applied 3 additional times and was turned away for similar reasons. We call these soft diversions. So the caseworker is really discouraging the person from even applying to the program. We hear more and more reports of this happening across the country. So when we originally started this study, we wondered whether $2 a day poverty was a poverty that was sort of characteristic of people who are deeply disconnected from the labor market, a sort of underclass, to use sort of an unmoted and discredited term, that was deeply disengaged from work. But the weird thing, in meeting Madonna Harris, Ray McCormick, Travis and Jessica, is all had rich work histories, all thought of themselves as workers and were really proud of their identities as workers, and were engaged in the search for employment almost continuously during the times that we knew them. And so we went back to the numbers, and we asked the following question of the numbers. If you follow a child in $2 a day poverty for an entire year, how many of those children will have a parent in the household who works for at least a month? Now, the answer for the just plain poor, low-income kids in general, is 90%. So you might have heard rhetoric about the generational poor and the working poor. I once had a foundation president invite me to talk a couple years ago, and he said, we really want you to talk, but our focus is not on the generational poor, but the working poor, so you can't talk about $2 a day. And I looked at him and I said, well, if your theme is the working poor, then we will be talking about $2 a day. This distinction has largely disappeared, if indeed it ever. My first book would challenge that it ever really existed. But at least today, There is very little distinction between these groups, and there are very few people who are really deeply divorced from work. Even among the $2 a day poor, 7 in 10 children had a parent over the last year engaged in the formal labor market. So this isn't even counting informal work. So what's going on with work? The bad jobs of 20 years ago were simply much, much better than the bad jobs of today. And work has really changed for the poor, for the least skilled in our economy in 4 ways. First is the safety of work. So in the book we talk about Jennifer Hernandez. She too is from Chicago. She's moving across these homeless shelters also in the summer of 2010. She finds one homeless shelter in Chicago with a special program. If you can get a job within 3 months' time, you will get a 1-year subsidized apartment. And if you don't, you'll have to leave, because that's how the funding works. Okay, so Jennifer has already been in every other family homeless shelter she can think of. This is homeless shelter number 4. And she is determined to find a job. So she is combing the Clybourne corridor in the near north side looking for work. But Jennifer has a couple of problems that hold her back. One is that she's never seen a dentist, and she has badly and visibly decayed gums. Okay, we actually hired a professional social worker to scan the city of Chicago to find a free dental provider for adults. There are free dental providers for children, not one. Not one emerged in the city of Chicago that covered adults. So she has these gums, but also she had a pair of glasses where a bow had broken, and Medicaid at that time, I think this is still true, only allowed you a pair of glasses every 2 years. And so she was stuck with this lopsided gaze, for the year and a half before she could get another pair. And so, employers were sort of put off by her appearance. But finally, literally just days before the family was going to be evicted from the shelter, she found a job at Chicago City Custodial Services. So this is a place in the south side of Chicago that sent its workers to corporate apartment buildings to clean them between tenants, and she loved the job. She loved the feeling that she was making a visible difference, cleaning things until they shine was just such a point of pride for her. But as the fall headed toward winter, those contracts dried up. And pretty soon, the only work available was in cleaning foreclosed homes on the south side of Chicago. So if you know anything about foreclosed homes, you know they lack 4 critical things. What are they? Heat. You're Chicagoans, you know. Water. Pardon? Well, safety, yeah. So heat, water, electricity, right? And usually, and they were often incredibly moldy. They were sitting vacant, and they had all kinds of toxins in them. So Jennifer began cleaning these houses, and she'd come with a cleaning crew, and they'd fill the buckets at Chicago City with hot water. They'd drive to the south side. Sometimes they were cleaning as many as 12, 13 homes a day. The water would quickly run out, so they skulk, feeling ashamed at the filling station, and sneak their buckets under the faucet and carry them back. Sometimes they had to beg a neighbor for hot water, and they would scrub. As they took off the padlock off the front door, Jennifer said they never knew what they were going to find. Would it be, in her words, a drug den? Oftentimes, she said, the scrappers had come and stripped every piece of metal of value out of the apartment, leaving a mess. And Jennifer was a severe asthmatic. And so as it got colder and colder, and she was piling on coats from the Salvation Army, and the chemicals were creating her hands to bleed and scab, she began getting a series of respiratory sicknesses. And this, of course, spiraled to the children, who are also asthmatic. 2 times during that winter, her little boy, Cole, ended up in the emergency room. When, of course, he was not able to go to school, the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, does not allow you to leave a young child home alone, or you could lose custody of that child. So she would have to call her boss, Deborah, up Deborah then deemed her an undependable worker and cut her hours from 40 to 35 and then 30, and then 25 and then 20, and then 10. Finally, Jennifer had to quit that job because she only had 3 months of that housing subsidy left, and it had taken her 6 months to get this job. So she needed to get well and prepare. And I'll tell you in a minute that she didn't end up finding another job in Chicago and was homeless once again. So beyond that, a fundamental problem in America is the inability for people without a college degree to find full-time, full-year work. It's a huge problem, and it's increasing over time. Work hour fluctuations wreak havoc with parents, and labor law violations. So one common labor law violation is requiring a hotel attendant to clean a room before she's allowed to clock in. But also, these unstable jobs were sort of a toxic alchemy when mixed with unstable personal lives. And it was often that intersection of unstable personal lives and perilous work that created the spiral into $2 a day poverty. So Reba Cormac, again from Cleveland, works at Walmart from the age of 16, and Kmart, and she loves Kmart. Even though they never give her more than 25 hours a week, she is so proud to be a Kmart employee. But Kmart closes when Super Walmart comes to town. So she decides to set her sights on a job at Super Walmart. And she's going to be the best Walmart employee ever. She knows that they give awards for Employee of the Month, and she sets her sights on winning that award. So she's a cashier, and she soon notices that the one thing that slows cashiers down, right, at Super Walmart. You guys don't go to Walmart? Produce. So she keeps a little pad by her cash register, and she writes down all the barcodes of the commonly purchased produce items. She then devises a scheme where she reads these barcodes into the recording device on her phone, and then as she sleeps, she puts the recording on continuous play. As she put it, my subconscious did the job. So sure enough, she's named two-time Employee of the Month twice in just 6 months. Now, during this time, Ray has found herself a sort of a ragtag group of folks. There's a landlord, George. He's basically living in an abandoned building. He's sort of jerry-rigged some electricity, and he basically takes desperate people and rents them a room or a part of the room in exchange for whatever benefits they have. And so Ray is giving him all she's earning for the room and for the use of the pickup truck. So George has got a pickup truck. And so she uses virtually all of her earnings to put gas in this pickup truck and keep it in good working order. And one morning, Monday morning, she's on her way to Super Walmart, and she tries to turn on the car and notices the gas tank is empty. It turns out that without her knowledge, George and his wife Camilla have done errands all weekend and have used up all the gas. So she runs into the house. Nobody in the household has even a dime they're willing to contribute to the gas tank. So she's desperate. She calls her manager, will somebody give the two-time Employee of the Month a ride or a loan? And of course, you can imagine what her manager is thinking, right? He's got 100, probably, if you read the research on Walmart, 1,000 other potential cashiers he can easily hire. So he says to her, honey, if you can't get to work on time, don't bother coming in at all. And this is just this turning point in Ray's life that leads to this spiral into $2 a day poverty. So housing instability, the third leg of this three-legged stool I'm building for you, is ubiquitous in the life of the poor. I guess that should be obvious. How on earth do you stay stably housed if you don't have any money? Now, you might think that the best thing for the $2 a day poor to do is to fall into the arms of family. But what we found is also characteristic among the $2 a day poor is they're often involved in toxic personal networks. And indeed, that is another part of this unstable personal life story that leads to these spirals into $2 a day poverty. So when we were doing this research, we began exploring the literature on ACEs. Anyone heard of those? ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So this is very big in public health and medical resources. These are experiences of trauma and abuse that happen in childhood that we now know cast a very long shadow over the entire arc of a young person's life, well into adulthood. And while we were doing this field work, we saw incidences of abuse and neglect happening in a particular context, the perilous repeated double up. Okay, so this is how the $2 a day poor live. They find a couch here from somebody who's willing to take them in, and then that person's landlord says the water bill's too high, either they go or you go, and so on. And so we see the poor moving through these repeated perilous double ups. And to just give you one example of what can happen in those double ups, when parents are able to exercise little discretion over who's going to be their custodian. I'm going to talk about Jennifer Hernandez again since we're here in Chicago. Jennifer did not find another job. She was homeless again. But an uncle in Texas offered to take the family in. He had a spare room. They had heard rumors that this uncle had his issues. They knew he drank too much. But nonetheless, it was the only choice they had. So she used her tax refund to get 3 Greyhound tickets, and off they went to South Texas. And so when they were there, Jennifer managed to find a little job at a cafeteria at the small airport there. She was feeling good, but she came home one Saturday after work and found Uncle Jose molesting her 9-year-old daughter, Caitlin. So imagine her seeing this scene. She literally grabs Caitlin, and Cole, who's been watching in the corner, they run to the bedroom. They throw everything they can into the pillowcases, everything the pillowcases can hold, and they run out the door to the Goodwill. It's about a mile away. The good people at Goodwill don't even have a family shelter, but they empty out an office with a lock on the door for this family until they can figure out what to do. And when relating this story to me, Jennifer shrugs and she says, I never expected it. Reba Cormac has been living in $2 a day poverty on and off since the age of 12 when her father died, and her mother fled to the hills of Tennessee with a lover, leaving Ray alone with only her pit bull, Sweetie, for company. Ray managed to get by with her father's Social Security death benefits when she went to the liquor store, this tiny little girl, and cashed. People in the neighborhood sort of knew about it, sort of were keeping quiet. It's a pretty poor neighborhood. But some friends of her father were there who were sort of looking out for her. And in relating these repeated experiences of near destitution, Ray simply shrugs and says, yeah, I've been beat, I've been raped. Now, I promised I'd talk a little bit about more about child homelessness, but just to illustrate this point, these are data from the nation's schools. So since 2005, every school in the United States has had to report when a child is homeless. And that first blurb there is Hurricane Katrina. But after that, we see this monotonic rise in the number of homeless students in the U.S., illustrating that likely that gap that we saw is due to this. We've also now done an analysis using the best data available. The methods are complex, I can tell you about them, but we are able to make causal estimates of the impact of declining cash welfare within a state directly on child homelessness, and we find, and this is shocking if you know anything about social science research, this is a very, very big impact, that for every 100 fewer cases of TANF in a state over a year, we see 14, yes, I said 14 more homeless children as reported by their schools. So a direct correspondence between the shrinking of the cash safety net and what's happening to our kids. This is also associated strongly with reduced odds of high school graduation, reduced odds of college attendance, and of course obesity, depression, smoking. So all indicators that child homelessness is casting a very long shadow, not just over the immediate circumstances of a child, but that child's life chances moving forward. So how do they survive? Now, I'm not going to tell you the answer because I want you to buy the book. I want you to read it. I want you to discuss it. It's a phenomenal stocking stuffer. I just did a talk in Houston, and a guy bought a whole case of books. He's giving it to everyone on his Christmas list. So, you know, you might think, gee, this is really for the charitable sector. The charitable sector is heroic. But if you talk to anybody who works in the sector, and there may be some people here, you know, the need is so great and their resources are just a drop in the bucket. What we know about private charities, it works best when it's complementing public sources of support. So the other problem with private charity, of course, is it's unevenly distributed. The poorest places have weak or non-existent private charity, whereas the richest places, like Boston, have very, very vigorous private charitable sectors. So two survival strategies I will describe briefly are selling your SNAP for cash. Now, in Chicago, the going rate is about 60 cents on the dollar. In the Mississippi Delta, the going rate is only 50 cents on the dollar because you have so many poor people there sort of competing in the market. But what that means, if you sell your SNAP, is that you're going to be very, very hungry because the SNAP program is set up to only cover about 2/3 of your food needs. So we know from lots of studies that SNAP tends to run out about 2.5 to 3 weeks into the month. Families who sell SNAP see that money dissipate maybe a week and a half into the month. Why do they sell SNAP? Well, because you can't buy socks and underwear with a medical card. Or if you're lucky enough to have a housing subsidy, you can't pay your electrical bill. You know, all of these things that you actually need to survive because you actually can't survive on $2 a day in cash income have to come from somewhere. And so while food stamp fraud is very rare in the United States, only about 1.5%, the best government study shows, it is nearly ubiquitous, at least among the $2 a day poor that we studied. And I'm going to kind of show you how that works in a minute. We see some old-fashioned American ingenuity in the story of Paul Heckwilder from Cleveland. He had a family pizza business that folded, and so its entire extended family lost their jobs all at once, and 24 people were living in his tiny little home, all on one little Social Security check of about $1,100, putting them into $2 a day poverty. They had this marvelous scheme of taking the gutter apart so they could capture all of the rainwater and use that rainwater to wash clothes. Jessica Compton has another very common strategy. We noticed over time that almost all of the people we talked to had little divots in their arms. These were scars from giving plasma so frequently. And indeed, this is the only source of cash income that's coming into Jessica and Travis's home. The whole family, including little Blythe and Caitlin, they go down to the library and they sort of park there while Jessica goes to give plasma. Travis can't because he's got too many tattoos. And you got to tell the people at the clinic where all your tattoos came from, and he doesn't have the documentation. So Jessica goes twice a week. This is as much as the government will allow, and she gets about $25 a shot. It takes about 3 hours. This is actually the the most well-paying of all the strategies we documented, but it is physically debilitating for a woman who only weighs 111 pounds, just 1 pound over the limit for donating. And it just exhausts her. But selling plasma is so common, we call it the lifeblood of the $2 a day poor. This is a plasma clinic in Cleveland, right on 25th Street. This is where Reba Cormac and Paul Heckwilder donated plasma. I used to take people in my car. We'd go sit at that bar up by up in the upper right corner of your screen. It's called the Stumble Inn. And we would just watch for the bus to stop at the bus stop. And I'd say, you're going to see 30 people get off this bus, and they're all going to go into that plasma clinic. And it never failed. Recently, we had a documentary film crew interviewing people in line at that plasma clinic. And there was a woman in the middle of a Cleveland winter without shoes, waiting to donate. This is big business in America. There were about 5,000 donations in 2005. We're now up to 32 million donations in the United States. The United States provides 70% of the world's plasma. We are, for those of you who are old and you know what OPEC is, it was an oil cartel in the 70s, we are the OPEC of plasma for the world. And this is because every other country in the world says that frequent plasma donation is a health hazard and they don't allow it. Okay, so very, very big business. We have geocoded every plasma center in the country after doing this research and found that the best predictors of where plasma clinics are located is not whether there are poor people in the census tract, but the percentage in the census tract that are extremely poor, that are what the Census Bureau calls deeply poor, earning less than 50% of the poverty line. So the strongest predictor of where these plasma clinics are located to capture the blood plasma of our poor citizens. Now we're going to end with the Mississippi Delta. And I want to tell you about a woman I met there with 13 children. Her name was Alva Mae Hicks. She had no cash income, but she did have food stamps. At that time, she also had a housing subsidy. She used to sell about $600 of her food stamps at 50 cents on the dollar to pay her $300 utility bill in a climate that in the prior 6 months to when we interviewed her had ranged from 9 to 109 degrees. This meant that the food stamps in the house ran out about 1 week in. And her daughter Sabrina and her brothers were just very, very, very hungry. They were the hungriest kids I had ever met. So Sabrina was 18 when I got to know her. I spent a lot of time talking with her. And finally, one day when we were having coffee at Yazoo Pass, it's a little coffee shop in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where the old Woolworths was. This is a Woolworths that closed down in 1965 rather than integrate its lunch counter. And finally, I got the courage to ask Tabitha, you know, what does it feel like to be hungry? And her answer was really telling. But before I go there, I want to tell you one story about what it meant to be that hungry to her. Before I met her, when she was in middle school, a teacher inboxed her on Facebook. And the message read, I've been watching you, waiting for you to mature. This teacher then invited Sabrina to his house after school to have sex with him in exchange for food. This is a liaison that went on for 5 months before, desperate with guilt and shame, she, a very deep Christian girl, finally told a teacher. And miraculously, this teacher, an outsider from Teach for America, not only got her out of the situation, but got her into a private boarding school in Memphis. So anyway, after hearing this whole story, there's another story in the book about a brother's suicide due to this hunger. But here's what she said to me. She said, well, actually, it feels like you want to be dead because it's peaceful being dead. So what do we do with that? You know, Luke and I are both people of faith, and usually I end with a quote from some famous person, but Luke said this recently, and I want to read it to you. We live in an America where eviction is common, where the poor sell their blood plasma just to scrape by, fueling a multi-billion-dollar industry, where infant mortality among the vulnerable ranks with much poorer nations, where we incarcerate those at the bottom at rates unprecedented in human history, and where life expectancy is well below much poorer countries and falling. We can argue about the causes and consequences of poverty and what to do about it. But can anyone really argue that we've solved it? I think I'm going to end there and take your questions. Got mics.
As you can see, we have microphones on the right and on the left, so please come on down and ask some questions of Dr. Edin.
So, my name is Rose Wright. I definitely do want to hear about your faith journey at some point, but my first question is, what do we do?
Oh, that's the next slide.
There we go.
So we actually, this was a very cool thing. I had a graduate student who's actually a Wheaton College alum who was working on the Hill just before coming to graduate school. And he convened a group of policymakers, including the president's chief domestic policy advisor, President Obama's chief domestic policy advisor. And we spent a day at Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, all the presidents of those organizations. It was an amazing group. And we spent a day sitting with these stories. And there are 14 policy recommendations at the end of the book that I would endorse, but they operate around 3 principles. First of all, we have a work-based economy, and we have a work-based culture. The way you get respect in America is through work. So we really have to do more to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to work full-time, full year, and that is not a reality in America today. Second, parents, you know, like knowing all of this, I walk through O'Hare and I think, oh my gosh, hardly any of these people are making enough to actually sustain an apartment. You know, much less a daycare bill or support a child. You know, this lovely woman was hearing the Christian testimony of this elderly lady that she was a wheelchair assist, sharing her faith. I'm thinking, does she even have enough money for a little life? You know, we need to ensure that parents can raise children in a place of their own where they're safe and free from harm. And finally, there are going to be times when work doesn't work, so we do need some sort of cash safety net. Can we resurrect welfare? Probably not. But there are many other creative ways to expand work supports and create subsidized jobs that could get a lot more Americans with a much stronger footing. But I'll tell you what really surprised me, and that is when we asked people what they thought we should do, nobody said, gee, I want more handouts. Instead, over and over again, they said, I want more work. And I want to contribute. One woman who was living in her car in Johnson, Tennessee, had this horrendous life, and a really neat Christian lady also. And I said, you know, what's it like to participate in this research? And she said, if my pain can help even one person, it will have been worth it. So there's this really strong sense in the field work of wanting to contribute, wanting to be recognized as a meaningful and member of community. Right, so at the end of the book, we really endorse For any Christian organization or governmental agency, any nonprofit, as they think about moving forward, they should impose the following litmus test. Is what we're doing incorporating the poor? Is it recognizing their gifts and talents? Is it making them full citizens? Is it embracing them fully as people? Or is it stigmatizing them and setting them apart? And so the deeper point is about human dignity. Yes, material resources are important. But in America, we've made you trade away your dignity for a little bit of money from the government. And there's no evidence that works. So I can say a lot more about that, but I'm going to let this gentleman ask his question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Edens, for being here again. During your comments, you mentioned that at a lot of stores like Walmart and Kmart, there are a lot of people competing for low-wage positions like a cashier. And in other economics classes that I'm taking right now, we've looked at the unemployment rate in the United States right now and how it's relatively lower than it's been in the past. So what can your research tell us about reconciling the low unemployment rate, but still the incredibly high demand for low-wage work?
You know, it's interesting. There's a good question. There's a new book out by Peter Bierman and Adam Reich showing that when a new Walmart opens up, generally it is harder to get a job at that Walmart than to get into Harvard. It's kind of an amazing book by two very well-known sociologists who have strong quantitative chops. Yeah, so these truths these things are both true. I'm at the Woodrow Wilson School. I hang around with economists who study this stuff, and we also have we've had a historic fall in labor force participation among prime age men. You've probably heard that. So more and more, the unemployment rate seems to be a poor indicator of what's really going on. And there are a lot of people who aren't showing up in that number because they're so-called discouraged workers who are out of the labor market that are probably really interested in working. So that's probably what reconciles these things. But if you go to most places in America, employers would tell you, I can't find workers. and poor people will tell you, I can't find work. Sometimes there's a simple fix for that, right? There's a bus can go from Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor and solve that problem. But other times it's the Reba Cormac problem. Your person doesn't have gas to get to work, or they're sleeping in their car, as was true of this woman with the attitude of gratitude. Right? And so what employers are doing in Michigan is they're forming cooperatives and hiring social workers to create this little bit of help here and there that can really boost employment and help people stay at their jobs. Over here.
Hello. I just had a question. You've definitely had a chance to interact with all sorts of different people from different backgrounds. And what is your advice for those interactions in a way that you're affirming their worth and building them up?
Yeah, you mean in the field?
Well, I guess kind of in general, in a sense, like how can we as a Wheaton community go out into the world and just with any person we meet, build them up and affirm their worth?
Yeah, so I do think this, the dignity principle is really important. It is amazing how everybody hates charity, but especially the poor. Can we move beyond charity and partner with the poor in ways that are meaningful? Can we close the gap in social distance? That's so profound in our country. So just to tell you a little story, there was a blog posted about $2 a day about a year ago, and it was by a former student of mine that I'd had at the Harvard Kennedy School. And someone sent it to me right before I was going to give a talk at the Cleveland Club, City Club of Cleveland. Of course, I was crying in my room, and it messed up my makeup and all of that. But so this teacher is this person who sees Tabitha and her friends. This teacher is this person who takes them to Washington, D.C. for the first time or none of the kids believe the elevator is real, and white people talk to them and don't use the word boy to refer to the young men in the group. And this teacher, he comes for Teach for America and stays on for 10 years. He's actually a student of mine at the Kennedy School prior to doing this. Just this amazing young person of privilege who decides to bridge this gap of social distance. And anyway, this blogger had read the book, and she was at a sort of a alumni party for TFA teachers, and she was telling the whole table about the book and about this Mr. Patton. We call him Mr. Patton in the book because we had to change his name, and how amazing it was that he's the one bright moment in the book, the one person who comes through. And there's a lull in the conversation, and her neighbor turns to her and he says, "I'm Mr. Patton." So it was her friend. She knew her friend had done TFA in Mississippi, but she hadn't realized, what a contribution she'd made. So she burst into tears at the table, and through this really messy sobbing tells the table that her friend is her hero. And she closes the blog by saying, he says to me, "You would have done it." And she says, "Well, maybe I would have, but I didn't do it. I didn't choose to close the gap." And so now she has dedicated her life to this purpose. And that's the most profound thing in many ways. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I have two questions that I want to ask. The first one is that it seems like most of the families living under $2 a day that you shared are led by a woman. And what's your take on the role of men in these families, and why is this the case? Sorry. And the second question is, how heavy is this issue related to racial ethnicity and injustice that the U.S. has experienced for a long time?
Great questions. So interestingly enough, $2 a day poverty is sort of an equal opportunity condition. About 40% of families in $2 a day poverty are married couple families. And about a little under half of $2 a day families are white families. So although we do see disproportionate representation, it is everywhere. And it is like, needles in a haystack all across America. And these are people that you see, because when they are working, they're making your McDonald's fries and they're cleaning your hotel room. So they're both invisible but visible. I might in my hotel in Chicago tonight run across somebody in this situation. So look for them, but they could be people who look like me or like you. There are not many, not as many, but it does occur. So this is not to discount historic discrimination that we know is with us. I have written 3 books on family structure, and I would commend those to you. I think they're pretty interesting, but it's a very important question. And are we holding accountable both parents and all of that? So excellent.
Ms. Edin, thanks so much. My question is not entirely unrelated to Cindy's, but I recently read The Truly Disadvantaged, where William Julius Wilson describes the plight of the American underclass, a group which is characterized by high levels of joblessness, out-of-wedlock births, crime, and female-headed households. Note that this is not my defense of the theory of poverty thesis. You made a comment earlier about the non-existence of this group. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that.
So William Julius Wilson reviewed $2 a day for the New York Times, and he's been my mentor for 30 years. It's great. That's a classic book. If the sociology had a Nobel Prize, he would have won it for that book. What that book essentially argues is that it is worse to be poor and live in a poor neighborhood than to be poor and live in an average neighborhood. And he takes data from Chicago, such a great city, right, to be studying this stuff, and finds that over time, your chances as a poor child of living in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty has grown dramatically. And what this has done is this has separated kids from role models and institutions and safe streets, all things that they might have enjoyed more of in the past. I mean, there's a complicated story about segregation, and these were segregated neighborhoods these kids were living in before. They were income diverse, but they were racially segregated. So that book came out in 1987, right? We had a robust welfare system in 1987. And there were a lot of folks collecting welfare and not working, at least not working above board. My first book showed that they were all working, but they were working under the table because you couldn't survive on $375 from the state of Illinois a month for your entire family, so you had to work in order to survive. But things have changed, and welfare reform passed in 1996, and this is really a phenomenon of the last 25 years. So it's great to hear that you're reading that book, and I've written another very recent book that's really a salute to and an update of what's happening with social isolation among America's poor. It's called Coming of Age in the Other America, so just out last year.
Hi.
I was so glad to see a baby in the audience.
Yes.
That's so amazing.
Baby Wendell has a question.
Okay, baby Wendell.
No, I did. I was just wondering if you could share your faith story. You referenced that at the
thank
beginning.
you.
I thought that would be really interesting.
Yeah, so I really became made a confession of faith, believe it or not, at 4 in the driveway. My mother used to take me out and pray under the stars. So that came very early for me. I was a very committed young evangelical kid. I applied to 3 colleges, Bethel, Wheaton, North Park, and decided to go to North Park because they made you wear skirts here. That wasn't going to happen. So, so I remember just wanting to know, like, what is God, requiring of me? What is His purpose in my life? And I remember watching Brother, Sun, Sister Moon about St. Francis of Assisi with my college roommates, and we actually went barefoot for several days in a Chicago winter after watching that movie. So we were passionate young kids. Sometimes I think it's not cool to be passionate anymore, but we were really passionate. And I had a teacher who was a member of LaSalle Street Church in downtown Chicago. At that time, the Cabrini Green Housing Project was just beyond probably the United States' and maybe the world's most notorious housing project. Jane Byrne, just prior to my freshman year, had moved in to she was the Chicago mayor at the time, to quell the violence. The mayor moves into a housing project. She didn't last very long. But I was an intro to Soc, and my teacher said, I have extra credit available for anyone who wants to go work in Cabrini Green. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew what extra credit was. So I raised my hand. And working through LaSalle Street in Cabrini was where this all began. I met my first families. I began majoring in Cabrini Green and minoring in college. It was amazing, and I felt whole. I really felt that I'd just an incredible joy in the work that's never left me. So it was really, the motto of North Park was when faith and learning meet, and for me that college experience afforded that. So there's lots more to tell, many more adventures, but that was sort of the start of it all.
Hi. So I live in a very rural community, and we see a lot of abuse of the welfare system. And so I was wondering how you're seeing that in more of the communities you were talking about, of an average community with just some poor rather than a poor community, and how that's reflecting onto the very poor communities.
So there is county variation in 8 states. There is county variation in how welfare is administered. And there are a few counties where there are higher than average take-up rates for welfare. One is actually my hometown of Baltimore. But Baltimore has average TANF to poverty ratios, that this is the ratio of poor people that get any kind of welfare. But from one county is 9% and Baltimore is 59%. So this could be. And it's probably because it's a very poor place and it has very few jobs, and the state has figured out a way to support people because they don't know how to create jobs. But I wouldn't call it abuse, right? Because, you know, people need to feed their kids. So there are definitely welfare chiselers out there. There are just not very many of them. You know, Ronald Reagan probably won the presidency because of the welfare chiseler story he told, which was very loosely based on fact. Linda Taylor, a woman from Chicago, but greatly exaggerated on the campaign trail. Bill Clinton probably also won the presidency because of anti-welfare tropes. So these are very popular in the American imagination. You know, people rail against welfare today just like they did when welfare was at an all-time high in 1994. There's almost no change in the discourse despite the fact we have almost no welfare system left. So I think that should give us pause. What is this doing for us as a culture to create this mythic pariah class? And yes, it's not to say that it never happens, and there may be special cases where it is happening, but you know, one thing we want you to do in college is to share your views. This is crucial, right? This should be a community where we can ask these questions, but also doubt your doubts and doubt your assumptions. So go back and figure out what's going on, and I'll help you. Okay, I'll get some numbers for you.
Hello. I'm wondering if you have, or you probably haven't studied, but you may be aware of comparative studies of other industrialized nations besides the United States and their levels of poverty.
Yeah, so we're the winner.
Yeah.
I mean, by far, we're the most unequal rich nation. Although China is really working hard to catch up with us. No nation has the rates of poverty even close, or deep poverty, or child poverty than we do. There's no nation on earth that's rich and industrialized that has this extreme poverty. And you know, it's interesting. This year, the UN, for the first time, sent a special rapporteur to the United States, partly because of $2 a day. Philip Alston, amazing man. For the first time, the UN actually studied extreme poverty in America. And it is an amazing report. You can Google it. I like his first report better than his second, but they're both absolutely chilling. He toured the country, seeing for himself. We were trying to convince some very high-profile funders that this existed. And so just think in your mind of what's the biggest the biggest foundation in the world. And we actually put through our IRB process a member of the staff of that organization and took them down and met these families. So, you know, but we do have some peers. Right? We do have some peers. Lebanon, Mongolia, Tonga, and Grenada are our peers when it comes to two very scary indicators of well-being. One is life expectancy, and the other is infant mortality. And our poorest Americans' life expectancy and infant mortality, these are our peers. These are the only countries where we see rates of well-being sinking this low. So, you know, you might say, oh, gee, the United States is totally different from the developing world. Maybe not. And that's why the UN, much to, Nikki Haley didn't like this, but maybe she likes it again now. She didn't like this report, but Philip Alston, I commend that to you. Sorry for neglecting this side of the room.
It's okay. Hi, thank you again for coming. I was just thinking about, like, as a Christian, obviously there's motivation to help the poor. But I was thinking about how does the gospel like specifically play into how you do work? Because
Yeah.
obviously there's a very practical need because they need money, but like everyone needs the gospel. And so how do you put that into your work?
So, I mean, you guys know this, right? There is so much in the Bible about poverty and, you know, about God judging just not people but nations for how they treat their poor. So this is a marker of who we are as a people, how we treat our poor. So it's a test of us, right? Now, I can't share the gospel during, I can't evangelize during my work, but you cannot. So there are so many Christians I meet in my studies. I don't meet them at Princeton University or at Harvard or Johns Hopkins. You know, where are the Christians? I don't know, but they are in poor communities. So I end up having these amazing conversations about faith, and they're hard. So Sabrina, you know, is homeless at the moment. And she prays every day for her agony to end. But there are no shelters in the Mississippi Delta. If you got TANF, welfare, that's what we call welfare now, in Mississippi, the most you could claim if Tabitha's got one child, a brand new baby, she's homeless with a baby, is just about $100 a month. You know, she's got SNAP. There are no housing subsidies available. The waiting list is miles long. What do you do with that? You know, how do we respond to a Christian sister who's in this situation? So that's a pretty big challenge, you know, for me. Like, how do I even think about that? She prays more than I do, you know. So what do I do with that? And maybe that's just something for us to, you know, meditate on and think through.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your research with us. My question's semi-related to that, actually. In my family, we've always had the philosophy of the church kind of filling in where government lacks as far as poverty needs. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your own views on where the church can step into these places where the government seems to lack in really low poverty areas.
Well, most churches don't do anything. You know, like it's kind of stunning. And in part, it's because, you know, we have become more and more segregated as Christians, right? Where our churches have always been segregated racially, but they are at unprecedented levels of economic segregation now, more so than they've ever been. This is also true of our neighborhoods. It's also true of our schools. We're becoming an extraordinarily income segregated nation. So our sisters and brothers are not at hand. They're not even they're not in our churches, and they're not in our neighborhoods, and they're not in our schools. So the idea of who is my neighbor gets a little complicated. But I don't know. My feeling is that my church's philosophy is that you should find areas that you can really commit to for a generation, because the problems will take at least a generation to solve. So we have a ministry for people on HIV/AIDS, sex trafficking. We have a ministry to kids in a poor community. We provide after-school care, and one other that I can't remember. But I think that's a very exciting, and this is really sort of a part of the DNA of the church. So finding something you can commit to long term. But all of those ministries, Nicaragua is the other one. But all of those ministries involve making relationships. So it's not just giving, or not that it's bad to volunteer at a soup kitchen at Christmas time. That can be great too. You can have an encounter with somebody. You can make eye contact, treat someone like they're a real person, and that can be transformative too. But if you can find opportunities where you can actually form relationships and close this gap we see, not just in our society, but in our churches. That's what I would recommend.
Let's take this as the last question of the evening.
Right. So I have a question about when we're looking at the graph starting 96 with the welfare, is there any correlation to job moves overseas or something like that you see that sector that are, because you're saying these are people that want to work, right? Is there any correlation with that? And also looking forward, like you want to create more jobs for lower income classes. Now with autonomy coming and more people more work getting automated, how is that going to affect the possibility for these people to move forward?
So, yeah, this is a really great question. Like, well, how do we think about the future? We definitely need to improve the quality of the jobs we have. We could do that through tax credits. But what we found is that when employees get tax credits, this allows employers to lower wages. So for every tax credit dollar a low-wage worker gets, they lose about 35 cents in wages. So in some ways, we're subsidizing low-wage employers more than anything else. We could raise the minimum wage. We've got brand new evidence out from Seattle that it may not be as harmful to the economy, but we need to proceed carefully because we don't want to destroy jobs. We can certainly talk to employers and find out what's keeping them from hiring people full-time. There's a lot of disincentives to hiring people full-time, and we have not dealt with those head-on as a nation. So how can we help employers do the right thing? Because many employers want to do the right thing. But I think more fundamentally looking forward, we may need to think differently about work, right? The market, there's a lot of work to be done in our society. Our schools are overcrowded, right? Our streets are full of trash. Our parks are not even patrolled by park rangers, right? We lack basic infrastructure. Our infrastructure is in perilous condition in many parts of this nation, and the market will never meet those needs. So, we may have to think about not only subsidizing private sector employers to expand their workforces in ways that lower their risk, but we also may need to think about how to fund this broader range of social needs, and that probably involves enlarging the public sector. And one thing we do know about the public sector is we tend to see more racial equality. People get full-time work, they get benefits, and so on. None of these solutions is perfect, but we have to find ways of making it, what I say when I go through O'Hare is, everybody working here deserves a little life. You should be able, if you're working full-time, full year, this is a normative statement, it's not a social scientist statement, to find, get married, have a little house, and raise a child or two. This should be possible, and for more and more Americans, that's not true. So the quality of jobs has really changed dramatically over time, and I think that's what we have to focus on. Thank you so much, and go out and be amazing. I met some of you at an AEI event this summer. Are any of you here? Yeah. Oh, good to see you. Yeah. So I was debating someone at AEI. I was the progressive. I trounced him, but he's my friend, my conservative colleague. I didn't really. It was fun. So thank you all for coming, and be amazing.